A farmer is found shot to death in what appears to be a planned hit.
I didn't know the smell of gunpowder in your house, and that's a smell I will never forget.
He had extensive trauma to the left and middle of his face.
There was a perfect angle from the front porch down to the couch in the basement. We also found tracks around the house. It truly was as much of a hit as I have ever seen.
But in this small Midwest town, anyone could be the wolf in sheep's clothing.
The only person I know that I would think is capable is my ex.
Did you have anything to do with the murder?
Hell no. I had better things to do.
The investigation reveals a toxic family dynamic and the measures one person would take to conceal their misdeeds.
He had been threatening to turn them in for welfare fraud. 2 days before the homicide, he was texting, "I promise you, he will not make it till Monday morning."
I never thought in a million years you'd actually do it.
I stood up and sat on the door for a little bit, so I just lifted, shut my eyes, and let it fly.
March 10th, 2014. It's just after midnight in Barron, Wisconsin, when police receive an urgent 911 call.
Tiffany Workman called 911 reporting her boyfriend, Daniel Raven, had injuries to his shoulder.
He's got a hole in his arm, and I can't get him to wake up.
Your boyfriend has a hole in his arm?
Yes.
I remember talking to the emergency lady, and she said, "Does he have a heartbeat?" And I remember putting my cheek on his forehead, and I couldn't feel anything. I said he was still warm.
He's hurt. I don't know if he's sleeping. He's passed out. Oh my God. I don't know how this happened.
Our dispatchers immediately sent an ambulance, but also officers because the caller was very hysterical at the time.
Tiffany tells the deputy she and Dan had an argument that night, so he'd gone to sleep on the couch in their game room. A short while later, she was awakened by a loud noise.
I remember hearing a slam, and I walked out, and the glass on the screen door was broke. I said, "Why is there blood everywhere?"
She went downstairs and saw Mr. Raven on the couch, and when she approached him, she could see that there was definitely something wrong with him.
I'm not a hunter. I didn't know the smell of gunpowder in your house, and that's a smell I will never forget.
The deputy escorts EMTs inside, where they find a bloody scene.
The first responder determined immediately that Dan Raven was deceased. It was obvious that he had extensive trauma to his upper left bicep, and there were also significant injuries to his face.
Several more deputies are dispatched to secure the area. On the ground outside the broken glass doors, they find 2 empty shell casings.
The spent rounds were obviously from a long rifle versus a pistol or a shotgun.
We knew with the casings outside and the victim downstairs, it was going to be a homicide investigation.
I didn't realize that he was actually dead. I didn't know. I was under the impression that you guys are here to help him, you're gonna get him out of here, and you're gonna save him, and he's gonna be fine.
Daniel Raven had lived nearly his entire life in rural Wisconsin. He was born February 16th, 1981, the youngest of 3 children raised on a dairy farm.
We were all close We had lots of friends, lots of family. We spent many hours in our barn, just working, playing. We'd go camping, we'd go fishing, we'd play out in the pasture. We lived on a farm, so you made up your own fun.
Dan's dad was a hard worker. He instilled that in Dan because Dan was an extremely hard worker as well.
Dan's first job, I believe he was a sophomore in high school, and he worked as a dairy's aide, basically milking, milking cows.
Between work and his studies, Dan was extremely busy, but he made time for a beautiful young woman named Trista Hrabak. Like Dan, she'd grown up in the area in a close-knit family.
Trista was in our social circle in high school, and that's how we all kind of started hanging out together. They eventually started dating. They would go hiking and four-wheeling, and they loved to be together. She just had a way about her. She could get anything she wanted.
A few years later, Trista announced that she was pregnant.
He was surprised and very happy. His daughter was actually born a couple months before my oldest daughter.
And a couple years later, then come little boy, and Dan was happy. He was very happy.
After 7 years together and 2 children, Dan and Trista decided to make it official in 2005.
When I heard they were getting married, I went up to Dan and asked him, "Are you sure?" From what Dan told me, they fought quite a bit and argued, and he said, yeah, I wanted to start a family, but, he already had kids with her.
Dan loved his kids. He would take them hunting and fishing and tried to spend as much time as he could with them.
A few years later, Dan and Trista embarked on a new venture together, running a cafe within the local livestock auction building.
It was the restaurant's Bullwhip Cafe at the sales barn in Barron, Wisconsin.
I believe they got it from her parents, or her mother had ran it, and they did good there for a while.
Now in their early 30s, the stress of running a restaurant and raising a family took a toll on Dan and Trista's marriage.
There were many times he would call upset, or I could tell he was upset because he'd struggle. Most married people do. They all have their problems, but the more he tried, the more difficult everything became. It wasn't working.
Them fighting, not seeing each other, making amends, getting back together, it was just a cycle off and on. I thought that was the final straw, and Dan would finally be like, this woman doesn't love me.
He wasn't happy. And then he moved out. He got his own place.
After 8 years as a married couple, Dan and Trista divorced in 2013. They shared custody of their children, but Dan was saddened by the limited time he got to spend with them.
Dan managed the turkey barns. He was up from sunup to sundown. That farm was all he ever did. He didn't get a chance to do a whole lot because he was always at the farm.
He went through a period of depression. Then he went through a period of, drinking kind of heavily towards the end of it. But he was sad about the whole thing.
Dan's life seemed to take a turn for the better when he met Tiffany Workman.
I met Dan through work. We kind of built a friendship through there. He kind of grew up in a similar farm background life. We just kind of hit it off.
When he met Tiffany, it was nice to see him feeling good and, just being happy with life.
Like Dan, Tiffany was divorced with 2 children of her own. They moved into a house together on the farm where they worked.
He was always equal with my kids, just the same as he was with his, and I think that was amazing. We kind of blended really well.
She was doing wonders on him because he was so happy, and I don't know, he just seemed to be back in his groove. The storm was over.
But Tiffany has just found Dan shot to death, and detectives are analyzing the scene to determine what happened.
There was a perfect angle from the front porch that you could see down to the couch in the basement. Somebody walked up to the outside of the door, did not attempt to make entry, fired 2 rounds through the door, making what would be perfect shots at a victim lying defenseless. We also found tracks leading up from the roadway and around the house where the person appeared to be trying to observe the residents before moving into position and making the shots. It also showed us that the person parked out on the roadway and walked up along a tree line to conceal their identity.
After inspection of the house, it was our belief there was some sort of connection between the shooter and the victim.
It wasn't random. It truly was as much of a hit as I have ever seen. Tiffany was the first one on scene, the only one awake in the residence.
They bring Tiffany to the station for further questioning.
They started asking me all questions like, what happened? What did you do? And it's like, what did I do? I didn't even know what was going on.
I informed her that Dan was, in fact, deceased, where she began sobbing and crying and became very emotional. And it was quite apparent she was not aware that he had passed away.
I just wish this was a dream.
Sometimes people can be pretty good actors, but in her case, she was really distraught. And based on her reaction to what happened, it really didn't seem like she was the person who was involved or had anything to do with it. But you never really know.
Coming up, police question Tiffany about the events leading up to Dan's murder.
Who do you think is capable of this?
And evidence surfaces of a scheme at play.
Shortly before he got killed, Dan showed me a stack of papers about this thick that he had on her.
The Barron County Sheriff's Department is investigating the murder of 33-year-old turkey farmer Daniel Raven. With his girlfriend Tiffany ruled out as a suspect, they hope she can offer further leads. They ask her to describe what happened the evening before the shooting.
Tiffany said on Sunday evening, around 6:30, 7 p.m., she had picked up her 2 children from her ex-husband who had visitation over the weekend. When she came back to the residence, Daniel was downstairs watching television.
He had a few drinks. We'd had an argument earlier that day, which was wild because we never argued before. And I remember thinking, this is just weird, like something weird is going on. And he's like, I'm not coming down yet.
She reported that was the last time she seen him alive.
The evidence appears to support Tiffany's claims.
We could not find a gun in the residence, nor were there tracks that would indicate it may have been taken somewhere and dumped. If it wasn't her, who could it be? What has been going on?
Who do you think is capable, of this?
The only person I know that I would think is capable is my ex.
Him and I had a lot of rough patches, I guess would be the best way to say it. We had domestic issues. I was scared of him.
She stated that he was working typically out of state, and stated that he had been in Barron County on the weekend of this homicide.
But Tiffany says she isn't the only one who has a disgruntled ex.
I know he's been having a lot of problems with his ex. There's always some drama going on with those two.
And who is that?
Trista Hrabak.
She described the contentious divorce and child support hearings between Dan Raven and Trista Hrabak.
November of 2013, his attorney had sent a letter in a court hearing to requesting a change in support because Dan was paying, I think, $256 a month and wanted it reduced because Trista had been making more money than she reported.
The plan was he was supposed to go to court with Trista that week, and they were going to bring that all forward because he had talked to a lawyer. He had everything all lined up.
And that was upsetting Trista.
When Dan had brought Trista to court, he had told me, Tiff, if anything ever happens, it's her. It's Trista.
Following the interview, police find plenty of evidence to back up Tiffany's claims.
Dan and Trista had a lot of ongoing small complaints about each other, violations of the child custody, and contacting each other in a negative sense.
He had custody, 50-50 custody of the kids with Trista. He also paid child support.
But Dan claimed Trista went to extreme lengths to get more.
Dan had told me she was falsifying records to make it look like she wasn't making any income to continue to try to bleed him as much as she could.
Shortly before he got killed, Dan came up and showed me a stack of papers about this thick that he had on her. Food stamps, lying on taxes.
He was accusing her of underreporting and non-reporting income to the court, which forced Dan Raven to get an attorney and hold more hearings.
Daniel was killed before the issue could go to court, and Trista was never charged with any crime. Daniel's loved ones are devastated to learn of his death, and they all agree with Tiffany.
Everyone consistently kept mentioning Trista's name and Trista having something to do with this crime.
But before speaking with Trista, detectives first want to rule out Tiffany's ex-husband.
Tiffany's ex told us that he had the kids on the day prior to the homicide, and he had dropped the kids off with Tiffany in the afternoon, and then from there, just out drinking. Around 2:30 in the morning, he turned in for the night.
He was adamant that he had no involvement.
We then followed up with all the names and establishments that the ex-husband provided, and all of the leads that he gave us panned out for him.
Tiffany's ex is officially ruled out, and of their 3 possible suspects, detectives are now left with 1.
And what Tiffany said, and the history that officers already knew, we definitely believed we knew we had to look at Trista very closely.
Before approaching Trista Hrabak about her conflict with Dan Raven over child support, investigators speak with his family to learn more about their history.
Dan had called me up, and he was cleaning out his blazer, and he found a sawed-off shotgun under the seat that he believes, and I believe, that she planted there to try to get him into trouble.
Dan had a felony in his past, so he would get caught for felon in possession of a firearm, which could have easily sent him to prison for 2 years.
The incident wasn't reported formally, so no charges were pressed against Trista. However, Dan had responded by threatening to turn Trista in for what he claimed was criminal fraud regarding the misapplication of food stamps.
He told me she was using food stamps, Wisconsin food stamps, to pay for food for the restaurant after they had broken up. And that's the only way she could afford to keep the restaurant going.
Daniel claimed Trista had not been reporting that income.
I think a lot of it was just empty threats about turning her in for that stuff. It was just kind of his way to kind of get back at her.
Detectives soon receive a new lead.
The Barron County Sheriff's Department was contacted by a caseworker from the Department of Health and Human Services. She told the communications center that she had important information that might be relevant to the case.
The social worker says she was asked to interview Trista Hrabak and her new live-in boyfriend, Ian Shirley, after a complaint filed by Ian's ex-wife.
I had made a report against Ian and Trista shortly before everything happened, just from things that my girls were saying. Trista kind of ignored them when they were there, like acted like they didn't exist. I know that the girls had to sleep on the floor.
I was happy for my dad at first because he was really hung up on my mom for a long time afterwards, so I was glad he was kind of moving on. Later on, she started to, really show that she didn't really like me and my sister.
Trista is very manipulative because your feelings aren't important to her, really. It's her way or no way.
She would try to hit my dad. He wasn't allowed to defend himself. She would come wake us up in the middle of the night and drag us into their fights.
It seems Ian and Trista's fights were about her ex-husband, Dan. And during the interviews, Ian said something alarming.
As she was interviewing Ian Shirley about his actions living with Trista Hrabak, Shirley made an offhanded comment that the quickest and easiest way to end this conflict is to kill Dan Raven.
Armed with this new information, detectives subpoena phone records for both Ian and Trista. While the request is being processed, investigators track down the couple at a local restaurant 2 days after the shooting. They pull Ian outside to question him.
How did you guys get along with either Tiffany or Dan? Or
The only time I ever talked to Dan was the very first time I ever met Trista.
Okay.
A little more than 2 years ago.
Do you have anything to do with the murder of Dan Raven?
Hell no. I have better things to do.
Ian claims he and Trista were out together the night Dan was killed.
Of March 9th, he and Trista had went to a local bar. He said at what I recall to be 8:30, 9 p.m. at night, they were planning on traveling to rural New Auburn, which is approximately 20 miles away.
We were going to go there and get something to eat. And we just walked out there and realized they stopped serving at 9. So we turned on and went home. Got home quarter after 10 and closed.
He told us if we checked their cameras, we could see that he had not left the residence.
Ian also told us that he had only learned of Dan Raven's death at approximately 6 a.m. the next morning, when he said his phone blew up by everybody asking what happened.
After speaking with Ian in the parking lot, we went inside the cafe and met with Trista in the back.
Who all went out? Just the two of you?
Just me and him. We ran into a bunch of people we knew.
And then you go home? Okay. And then what?
We stayed up talking for a while. Sounds good.
Trista downplays any recent tension between herself and Dan.
When we first separated, it wasn't very good. I mean, we were at each other like a lot. We got along after all that.
When asked directly if she was involved with Dan's death, she indicated there was no way that she would be responsible.
But detectives aren't convinced.
The story was too rehearsed. If the story wasn't as rehearsed, it would have made it more believable, which did not take them off the suspect list. It actually pushed them higher.
What should happen? The person would eventually caught because they will be caught.
I think they should have to definitely go. I think they should go down the same way he did.
However, investigators need more to be able to press any charges.
We didn't have the physical evidence to tie Trista in without a confession at this time. We needed more. So when the cell phone records came in, detectives immediately started combing through them.
We noticed immediately text messages between Trista Hrabak and Ian Shirley that were relevant to this case.
They were chilling. It was something I had never seen before.
Coming up, a murder plot unfolds.
The persuasion, threats, violence, it was all spelled out.
And one of the co-conspirators decides to come clean.
Well, there ain't no help. I'm screwed.
Within 48 hours of Dan Raven's murder, Barron County detectives have uncovered cell phone records implicating his ex-wife, Trista Hrabak, and her boyfriend, Ian Shirley.
The text records indicated that there had been multiple previous attempts where Ian had went to the turkey farm to murder Dan Raven, but had backed out.
With every failed attempt, Trista turned up the heat.
She was very upset to the point where she was threatening to leave him if he didn't go through with killing Dan Raven.
2 days before the homicide, Ian was texting Trista saying, "I promise you, he will not make it till Monday morning." And Trista replied by saying, "Don't make me promises you can't keep." The persuasion, threats, violence, it was all spelled out in text messages that I've never seen before.
The texts are chilling, but they also reveal another co-conspirator.
While we're analyzing the text messages, we identify a third suspect, what we presume to be a driver.
The text message said, "Tell RB that we'll give him an extra $100 if we can get this done tonight." Ian had received a text message from RB at approximately 10:54 p.m. the night of the murder that he was on his way. Less than an hour and a half after this text message is received, Daniel is dead.
We take steps to try and identify who he is through his phone number. Ultimately, he's identified as Robert McBain.
With no apparent connection to the current suspects, investigators track him down.
Detectives went and located him at his place of work in the village of Cameron in Barron County.
And initially, Robert McBain denies being involved in the homicide, but we're holding some pretty good cards with the text messages. And so we start revealing some of that information to basically indicate that he's lying. And so he starts to give a little bit more information back.
He stated that he was friends with Ian Shirley and Trista Hrabak. He described how they would hang out together and have a few beers and drinks after work and on the weekends. He recalled Ian commenting several times while they were drinking that they wished Dan was dead.
We made jokes about it, but that's about it.
So what do you mean you made jokes about it?
Who doesn't want to, make jokes about Pop and their ex?
Robert says he didn't think they were serious, but eventually agreed to act as Ian's driver.
He stated that he had actually went with Ian Shirley on at least 6 previous attempts to the turkey farm with intent to kill Dan Raven. He said typically Ian would back out.
But the night of March 10th, when Ian got out of the car, Robert says he looked determined.
What did Ian do when you let him out there?
Went up to chat with him.
Okay. What did he have with him?
No gun.
What kind of gun?
Looked like an outsider.
He admitted to hearing 2 gunshots.
I was like, what the hell?
Because now you realize he did it.
Yeah. I was like, holy I never thought in a million years he'd actually do it.
After the shooting, he had followed Ian's directions where they stopped at a nearby bridge and had hid and concealed the rifle used in this murder.
McBain told the story, very believably, about hiding the murder weapon underneath a bridge, which detectives later found.
How much did you get paid, and who paid you? No bull aside.
No bull aside. Ian gave me about 120.
Were you supposed to get more after it was done?
Yeah.
How much?
Was it something like 500?
At the end of the interview, McBain was arrested and taken to the Barron County Jail for party to a crime of homicide. After McBain basically verified what we knew, but was able to put himself at the scene, and not just himself, but Ian Shirley as the man who truly pulled the trigger, it was then time to go back and meet with Ian Shirley again.
After damning text messages and a confession from the getaway driver, detectives confront Ian Shirley about killing Dan Raven.
He knew he was done. He knew that he was caught.
You got to understand it. For us to be able to help you, you got to be straight up with us.
Okay. Well, there ain't no help. Yeah, I did. I'm screwed.
Ian says Trista was desperate to get rid of Dan.
Ian told us Dan had been threatening to turn them in for food stamp and welfare fraud, and Trista was afraid she was going to go to federal prison.
So if Dan is out of the picture, that stuff stops, is what you're saying? His court case is dropped.
He described several different times of McBain driving him to the residence, getting dropped off, but never actually pulled the trigger.
And go back home with some piss poor excuse of why I couldn't do it or whatever, because I didn't want to.
But Ian says Trista didn't give him much choice.
It was either that or she commit suicide. And she jumped all over me and said, yeah, you know, if it ain't done by tomorrow morning, I ain't going to work, and by the time you get done, I won't be here.
It was kill Dan or lose her, and he didn't want to lose her.
According to Ian, March 10th would be his last chance to get the job done. Trista knew her children wouldn't be there, so he didn't have to worry about them.
He took a .30-06 rifle with open sights, and they drove to the turkey farm.
Shirley goes to the residence and sees Raven sitting on a couch in the lower level.
And I'm like, still weighing options and what the hell do I do? And, well, I actually pulled the trigger and it jammed.
Ian says he went back to the car, but knew he couldn't fail Trista again.
This was his chance to say it didn't work, but they went down the road. He cleared what appeared to be a jam, got the rifle ready to go, and had McBain drive him back.
After I reloaded and I went back up there, I stood out the side of the door for a little bit. And I didn't know what to do there. So I just lifted, shut my eye, and let it fly.
He was unsure of where he struck Daniel or if he struck Daniel because of how nervous he was.
As they drove away, Ian says Trista texted them updates as she listened to a police scanner.
So she basically knew based off the scanner that he was deceased.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping I didn't. I didn't.
He said once back at his house, he went through the woods and walked in this rear door that was out of view of the cameras. He said that the surveillance cameras that he and Trista had installed were actually a ruse. He said they planned the installation and this walkway being out of view as part of their ruse so that it would support their alibi as to being home. After hearing Ian's confession, he matched the crime scene. Caliber of the rifle recovered and the 2 bullet casings matched. It matched footprints that originally we noticed in the snow along the edge of the driveway and where a vehicle had parked on the roadway alongside the driveway. He was placed under arrest and subsequently charged with first-degree intentional homicide of Dan Raven. After the full confessions of Robert McBain and Ian Shirley, Trista Hrabak was arrested and transported to the Barron County Jail.
There's no way I can say bye to her first.
She's already being processed.
Trista Hrabak was also charged with first-degree intentional homicide of Dan Raven as party to the crime.
Trista's initial response to officers when being arrested was, "Why am I being arrested? I didn't do anything."
But even with confessions from her co-conspirators, prosecutors know holding Trista accountable could be an uphill battle.
Trista had invoked her right to an attorney and had not confessed.
She believes because she didn't.
Following their confessions, Ian Shirley and Robert McBain plead guilty to second-degree intentional homicide. Ian is sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Robert receives 15 years.
As we continued to interview the outlying people that were involved, from bar patrons to friends to family, the most consistent word I think I heard in interviews was evil. And that's a word that people use to describe Trista, was evil.
Ian's family provides some scathing testimony.
She was behind this. You know, Ian pulled the trigger, and he needs to be in trouble for that, but this was not his idea. Never.
Before I even knew who Dan was, and her kids knew it too, that she hated their dad. She was pretty manipulative.
She had just changed who he was as a person. Anyone who knows him knows that he would have never done something like this.
He had moved out of his house. He had sold everything that he owned and pretty much gave himself to Trista. It had gotten bad to where I don't think he seen much of a way out, you know.
I've heard her threaten suicide a few times during their fights. I think that's another manipulation tactic too.
Both Ian Shirley and Robert McBain were easily manipulated. Ian had described Dan Raven as being a nice guy, but was aware that Trista did not like him and wanted him out of the picture. Robert McBain said he had never even met Dan Raven personally, but simply knew of Trista Hrabak's hatred toward him. It was apparent that Trista Hrabak was actually the mastermind.
But without any direct evidence of Trista's involvement, prosecutors are worried she might be exonerated. So, they make a difficult decision.
There are always fears of taking your case to a jury trial, especially since Trista had not confessed and was blaming Ian for his actions and McMahon just going along with it.
Trista's attorneys seem equally concerned about risking a jury trial, so they accept a plea deal.
In February of 2015, Trista was sentenced to 15 years of initial confinement with 10 years on extended supervision.
When I heard my dad's sentence, I wasn't surprised by 20 years, but I think Trista should have gotten at least the same as my dad, at minimum.
The fact that you can plan, and I can say that, plan a murder like that and get people involved, not just once, but to try it multiple times, and then you get 15 years in jail? I mean, what kind of joke is that?
I don't think any sentence would have been fair enough for me, honestly. It's not for me to judge. It's not really even a judge to judge, but I don't think it was fair.
Every year, me and, my cousins, my friends, we get together, we have a guys' camping weekend where Dan's ashes are spread, and just hang out with Dan, and talk about old times.
There's a memorial out there for Dan, and we go out there every year camping just to kind of spend time with them.
I feel like Dan's been there for me a few times, and I try to live as best as I can for him. I feel like he's watching over me still.
I just want him to be remembered for not the hard times that him and Trista went through, but the good times. I remember him, and I will always remember him.
The quiet tranquility of rural Wisconsin was shattered by an act of chilling premeditation, an event that unveiled a sinister undercurrent beneath the placid surface of a close-knit community. On the 10th of March, in the year 2014, just after the midnight hour had chimed, a desperate 911 call pierced through the stillness in Barron, Wisconsin, reporting a gravely injured man. This was the moment Daniel Raven, a 33-year-old turkey farmer whose life was rooted deeply in the rich, fertile soil of his upbringing, was discovered shot to death in his home. The grim evidence painting a picture far more complex than a simple accident or random act of violence. The investigation that unfolded laid bare a web of toxic family dynamics, long-simmering resentments, and a cold, calculating determination to eliminate a perceived problem, revealing the tragic depths to which human conflict can descend when unchecked by reason and empathy. The immediate aftermath of the discovery was a maelstrom of shock and confusion. Tiffany Workman, Daniel's girlfriend, was the one who placed the frantic call, reporting that her boyfriend, Daniel, had sustained injuries to his shoulder. Her voice, laced with raw hysteria, conveyed the horror of her discovery. She recalled desperately attempting to ascertain if Daniel still had a heartbeat, placing her cheek against his forehead, feeling the lingering warmth, but no vital signs. The emergency operator's questions, asking about a pulse, echoed in the stark reality of the situation. Dispatchers, recognizing the gravity of the call and Tiffany's profound distress, immediately dispatched both an ambulance and law enforcement officers to the scene. Upon the arrival of the authorities and emergency medical technicians, the grim reality of the situation crystallized. Tiffany, attempting to recount the harrowing events, explained that she and Daniel had engaged in an argument earlier that evening. Following their disagreement, Daniel had chosen to sleep on the couch located in their game room in the basement. Sometime later, she was jolted awake by a sudden, jarring noise. A distinct slam. When she investigated, she discovered the glass panel on the screen door shattered. The sight that greeted her downstairs was a nightmare made real, Daniel on the couch, surrounded by blood. As she approached, the severity of his condition became chillingly apparent. The distinct and unforgettable smell of gunpowder filled the air, a scent alien and terrifying to one who was not a hunter, marking the house with the indelible odor of violence. The first responders, professional and stoic, quickly assessed Daniel Raven's condition, confirming with somber finality that he was deceased. The visible trauma to his upper left bicep was extensive, and there were also significant, devastating injuries to his face, indicating a brutal attack. The scene quickly transformed into a major homicide investigation. Additional deputies were swiftly dispatched, meticulously securing the area to preserve any potential evidence. Outside the shattered glass doors, on the ground, 2 empty shell casings were found, their presence a silent testimony to the deadly shots fired. The type of casings immediately told investigators that a long rifle, rather than a pistol or a shotgun, had been used. With the spent rounds located outside, and the victim discovered deceased downstairs, it became unequivocally clear that this was no accident, but a planned and calculated murder. Tiffany, still in a state of profound shock, initially believed that the emergency services were there to save Daniel, to get him out of there and ensure his recovery. The crushing weight of the truth, that he was already gone, hit her with immense force, leading to unrestrained sobbing and an emotional outburst that convinced the seasoned officers of her genuine distress and lack of involvement. Her reaction, deeply genuine and raw, distinguished her from someone who might be attempting to feign ignorance or emotion, thus largely ruling her out as a primary suspect in their initial assessment. Daniel Raven's life had unfolded almost entirely within the confines of rural Wisconsin. Born on the 16th of February in the year 1981, he was the youngest of 3 children, raised on a dairy farm, a upbringing that fostered a deep connection to the land and a strong work ethic. His early years were characterized by close family bonds, a wide circle of friends, and countless hours spent working and playing in their barn, enjoying the simple pleasures of camping, fishing, and exploring the pastures. Farm life, they often reflected, taught them how to create their own entertainment. Daniel's father was a hard-working man, a trait he profoundly instilled in his son, who in Teu Rano became known for his industrious nature. Daniel's first job, which he took on as a sophomore in high school, was as a dairy aide, primarily involved in milking cows, a demanding role that further cemented his dedication to labor. Despite a demanding schedule of work and studies, Daniel found time for Trista Hrabak, a young woman who, like him, had grown up in the tight-knit community. Trista was part of their social circle in high school, and it was through these connections that their relationship began to blossom. They enjoyed activities typical of young love in a rural setting, such as hiking and four-wheeling, relishing simply being in each other's company. Trista possessed a certain captivating charm, a way about her that allowed her to get what she desired. A few years into their relationship, Trista announced she was pregnant, a surprise that was met by Daniel with immense happiness. Their daughter was born a few months prior to Daniel's friend's eldest daughter, and a couple of years later, a son completed their family, bringing Daniel even greater joy. After 7 years of shared life and 2 children, Daniel and Trista decided to formalize their union in the year 2005. However, their relationship was not without its trials. A friend recalling Daniel's accounts of frequent arguments and conflicts with Trista even asked him before the wedding if he was truly certain about taking this step. Daniel, focused on building a family, proceeded with the marriage, deeply devoted to his children. He cherished spending time they keep to hat them, taking them hunting and fishing, trying to be an active and present father, despite the complexities of his marital life. A few years into their marriage, Daniel and Trista ventured into a new business endeavor, taking over the operation of a cafe located within the local livestock auction building in Barron, Wisconsin. This establishment, known as the Bullwhip Cafe at the sales barn, was believed to have been acquired from Trista's parents, or perhaps had been run by her mother previously. For a while, they experienced success in their new undertaking. However, as they entered their early 30s, the twin pressures of running a restaurant and raising a family began to strain Daniel and Trista's marriage. Daniel often confided in friends, expressing his distress and struggles, a common plight among many married couples. Yet for them, the difficulties seemed to escalate despite his persistent efforts. The relationship devolved into a recurring cycle of arguments, periods of separation, reconciliations, and then further conflicts, a pattern that left Daniel feeling increasingly unhappy. Eventually, the strain became too great, leading to Daniel moving out and establishing his own residence. After 8 years as a married couple, Daniel and Trista divorced in the year 2013. They shared custody of their children, an arrangement that, while practical, left Daniel deeply saddened by the limited amount of time he was able to spend with his beloved children. Following his divorce, Daniel dedicated himself to managing turkey barns, a job that consumed him from sunrise to sunset. This farm work became the almost exclusive focus of his life, leaving him with little opportunity for other pursuits. This period was marked by a profound depression, and for a time he sought solace in alcohol, drinking somewhat heavily as he grappled with the emotional fallout of his divorce and the pain of reduced access to his children. However, a hopeful turn in Daniel's life arrived when he met Tiffany Workman. Their connection began at work, evolving from a professional acquaintance into a friendship. Tiffany, like Daniel, came from a similar farm background, and they quickly found common ground. Witnessing Daniel with Tiffany was a source of comfort for his friends, as he appeared to be rediscovering happiness and a sense of purpose. Tiffany, too, was divorced and a mother of 2, and their blended family seemed to fit together seamlessly. They moved into a house on the farm where they both worked, creating a shared home where Daniel treated Tiffany as children with the same care and affection he showed his own. Friends observed a positive transformation in Daniel, noting that Tiffany had a wonderfully calming influence on him, helping him regain his joyful spirit and sense of rhythm in life. It seemed the emotional storm he had endured was finally over, replaced by a renewed sense of contentment and peace. However, this newfound tranquility was brutally interrupted by the discovery of Daniel's murder, and detectives immediately began a meticulous analysis of the crime scene to unravel the shocking events that had transpired. Their examination revealed crucial details. From the front porch, a clear and unobstructed sightline extended down to the couch in the basement where Daniel had been sleeping. This indicated that the perpetrator did not need to enter the residence. Someone had approached the exterior of the door, fired 2 rounds through it, executing what were described as perfect shots at a defenseless victim. Further, investigation around the house revealed distinct tracks leading from the roadway, circling the perimeter, suggesting that the individual had carefully observed the residence before positioning themselves to take the shots. These tracks also indicated that the shooter had parked their vehicle on the roadway, then proceeded stealthily along a tree line, evidently to conceal their identity and movements. The nature of the entry and the calculated approach led investigators to conclude that there was an intimate connection between the shooter and the victim. This was not a random act of violence, but a targeted hit executed with cold precision. With Tiffany Workman being the first and only person awake at the residence when the murder occurred, detectives naturally brought her to the station for further questioning. The initial interrogation was a blur of questions, and Tiffany, overwhelmed, reiterated her ignorance of the unfolding tragedy, stating she did not even know what was happening. It was during this interview that investigators officially informed her that Daniel was, in fact, deceased. Her reaction, a torrent of sobs and uncontrollable grief, further solidified their initial impression. She became deeply emotional, repeating her desperate wish for it all to be a dream. While law enforcement understands that individuals can be skilled at deception, Tiffany's raw, unfeigned anguish convinced the investigators that her distress was authentic. Based on her powerful emotional response and the details she provided, it seemed increasingly unlikely that she was directly involved in or aware of the planned assassination. However, in the careful world of criminal investigation, every possibility must be considered and every stone turned. As the investigation pressed forward, police continued their questioning of Tiffany, probing for any information that might shed light on the events leading up to Daniel's murder, seeking to identify anyone who might be capable of such a heinous act. This part of the inquiry also brought to light evidence of a long-standing scheme, suggesting that financial entanglements played a pivotal role in the victim's demise. Tiffany recounted the events of Sunday evening, the night before the shooting, explaining that she had picked up her 2 children from her ex-husband, who had weekend visitation around 6:30 or 7 in the evening. Upon her return home, Daniel was downstairs, watching television and enjoying a few drinks. She described a rare argument between them earlier that day, an unusual occurrence that had struck her as unsettling, making her feel that something strange was amiss. She stated that Daniel had not come back upstairs after their disagreement, and that was the last time she had seen him alive. The physical evidence found at the crime scene appeared to corroborate Tiffany's account. No firearm was discovered within the residence, and there were no tracks that would suggest a weapon had been taken and subsequently discarded nearby. This led detectives to pivot their focus from inside the home to external possibilities. If Tiffany was not the perpetrator, then the question remained, who was? Tiffany, prompted to consider Daniel's history, began to discuss the rough patches in his past, particularly his tumultuous relationship with his ex-wife, Trista Hrabak. She revealed that she herself had experienced domestic issues with an ex-partner and that she had been afraid of him, especially as he was often working out of state, but had been in Barron County on the weekend of Daniel's homicide. This brief detour into her own history further solidified her credibility as someone familiar with fraught personal conflicts. Returning to Daniel's relationships, Tiffany detailed the contentious divorce and child support hearings between Daniel and Trista. She informed the investigators that in November of 2013, Daniel's attorney had sent a letter and filed for a court hearing to request a change in child support. Daniel was then paying $256 a month, but sought a reduction, citing that Trista was earning more income than she officially reported. The plan, Tiffany explained, was for Daniel to attend court with Trista that very week, armed with information gathered by his lawyer, all of which was upsetting Trista greatly. She recalled Daniel telling her, in a chillingly prophetic statement, that if anything ever happened to him, it would be Trista. Following this interview, police initiated a thorough check, and indeed, they discovered a significant amount of evidence to substantiate Tiffany S.'s assertions. Daniel and Trista's history was replete with minor disputes and ongoing complaints, including allegations of child custody violations and negative communication. Despite Daniel having 50-50 custody of their children, he was also obligated to pay child support. However, Daniel vehemently claimed that Trista was employing extreme measures to secure more financial assistance. Tiffany further corroborated these claims, stating that Daniel had confided in her that Trista was falsifying records, manipulating her income statements to appear as if she earned less, all in a relentless effort to bleed him dry financially. Just prior to his murder, Daniel had shown Tiffany a thick stack of papers, what he termed his stick on Trista, which detailed allegations of food stamp misuse and tax evasion. He was actively accusing her of underreporting and outright non-reporting income to the court, compelling him to seek legal counsel and pursue further hearings. Tragically, Daniel was killed before this matter could proceed to court, and Trista was never formally charged with any crimes related to these allegations. As the devastating news of Daniel's death spread, his loved ones were left heartbroken. Universally and consistently, they echoed Tiffany's sentiments, mentioning Trista's name and speculating on her possible involvement in the crime. Before directly approaching Trista, however, detectives prudently decided to rule out Tiffany's ex-husband, the only other potential suspect brought forward. Tech's husband confirmed that he had indeed had the children on the day preceding the homicide, dropping them off with Tiffany in the afternoon. From that point onward, he stated he had gone out drinking, eventually turning in for the night around 2 or 2:30 in the morning. He maintained steadfastly that he had absolutely no involvement in Daniel's death. Investigators painstakingly followed up on all the names and establishments provided by Tiffany's ex-husband, meticulously verifying his alibi. Every lead he provided proved to be accurate, solidifying his innocence and officially ruling him out as a suspect. With Tiffany and her ex-husband effectively eliminated from their list of possible perpetrators, detectives were left with a singular, compelling focus: Trista Hrabak. The collective testimony from Tiffany, coupled with existing departmental knowledge of Daniel and Trista's contentious history, convinced the investigators that they needed to examine Trista's activities and relationships with extreme scrutiny. Prior to confronting Trista about the child support conflict and other allegations, investigators made the strategic decision to speak with Daniel's family, seeking to gain a deeper, more comprehensive understanding of the complex and often acrimonious history between Daniel and his ex-wife. Daniel's family provided revealing insights. One particularly disturbing incident was recounted by a family member. Daniel had called, distressed, after discovering a sawed-off shotgun concealed beneath the seat of his Blazer. He believed, and his family agreed, that Trista had deliberately planted the weapon there, an insidious attempt to incriminate him. Given Daniel's past felony conviction, Being found with a firearm would have constituted a felony in possession of a firearm, a serious offense that could have easily resulted in a 2-year prison sentence. Although this incident was never formally reported to the authorities and no charges were filed against Trista, Daniel's reaction was immediate and fierce. He retaliated by threatening to report Trista for what he asserted was criminal fraud related to the misapplication of food stamps. He claimed that after their separation, Trista was using Wisconsin food stamps to purchase provisions for the restaurant, a practice that, if true, indicated significant financial impropriety and was the only way she could ostensibly keep the establishment afloat. Furthermore, Daniel alleged that Trista was failing to report this income to the authorities, compounding her fraudulent activities, while Daniel's friends speculated that many of his threats to expose Trista's alleged misdeeds might have been empty, merely a way for him to seek retribution. The underlying tension and animosity were unequivocally real. A pivotal new lead emerged when the Barron County Sheriff's Department received a communication from a caseworker with the Department of Health and Human Services. This caseworker informed the dispatch center that she possessed important information pertinent to the ongoing homicide investigation. The social worker revealed that she had recently interviewed Trista Hrabak and her new live-in boyfriend, Ian Shirley. This interview had been prompted by a complaint filed by Ian's ex-wife, who expressed concerns based on observations and statements made by her daughters. The ex-wife reported that Trista tended to ignore the girls when they were visiting, acting as if they were invisible, and even compelled them to sleep on the floor. Ian's daughter, reflecting on Trista's behavior, initially expressed happiness for her father, as he had struggled with moving on after her mother. However, as time progressed, Trista began to openly demonstrate a strong dislike for Ian's daughters. The girls perceived Trista as intensely manipulative, viewing her as someone whose own desires always overshadowed the feelings and needs of others. The children even witnessed fights where Trista would attempt to strike their father, Ian, who was, according to them, not permitted to defend himself. They recounted being roused from sleep in the middle of the night and dragged into the midst of Trista and Ian's acrimonious arguments. It became evident that a significant source of contention in Ian and Trista's volatile relationship centered on Trista's ongoing animosity toward her ex-husband, Daniel. It was during these interviews that Ian Shirley uttered a profoundly alarming statement to the social worker. While discussing his contentious living situation with Trista, Shirley made an offhand comment to the effect that the swiftest and most straightforward resolution to this enduring conflict would be to eliminate Daniel Hrabak. This chilling remark immediately elevated both Ian and Trista's status in the investigation, signaling a deeply disturbing potential motive and the ominous prospect of escalating violence. Armed with this profoundly disturbing piece of new information, detectives initiated the process of subpoenaing phone records for both Ian Shirley and Trista Hrabak. While awaiting the processing of these crucial requests, investigators located the couple at a local restaurant just 2 days following Daniel's murder. Taking a strategic approach, they pulled Ian Shirley aside outside the establishment for questioning. During this initial interaction, Ian provided an alibi for the night Daniel was killed, claiming that he and Trista had spent the evening together. He stated that on the 9th of March, they had visited a local bar, and that at approximately 8:30 or 9 in the evening, they were planning to travel to rural New Auburn, a location situated about 20 miles away. Ian further asserted that he only became aware of Daniel Raven's death at around 6 o'clock the following morning, when he claimed his phone began to blow up with messages and calls from people inquiring about what had happened. Following their conversation with Ian in the parking lot, the detectives entered the cafe and proceeded to meet with Trista Hrabak in the back. During her interview, Trista actively downplayed any recent tensions or conflicts between herself and Daniel. When confronted directly with the question of her involvement in Daniel's death, she adamantly denied any responsibility, stating unequivocally that there was no conceivable way she could be culpable. However, the detectives remained unconvinced by her performance. They perceived her story as overly rehearsed, too polished and smooth, a characteristic that paradoxically made it less believable. Far from clearing her name, her seemingly too perfect narrative actually heightened their suspicions, pushing both her and Ian higher on their list of potential suspects. Despite their growing conviction, investigators at this stage understood that they lacked the concrete physical evidence necessary to press charges without a direct confession. They needed more substantial corroboration to solidify their case. The much-anticipated cell phone records finally arrived, and detectives immediately began a painstaking review of the voluminous data. Their diligent examination quickly yielded a breakthrough. They noticed, almost instantly, a series of text messages exchanged between Trista Hrabak and Ian Shirley that were intensely relevant to the case. These messages, they described, were chilling, unlike anything they had encountered before. They painted a horrifying picture of a premeditated murder plot unfolding through digital communication. The textual evidence shockingly revealed that there had been multiple prior attempts, all unsuccessful, during which Ian had gone to Daniel Raven's turkey farm with the explicit intent to commit murder, but had ultimately hesitated and backed out. With each successive failure, Trista pressure on Ian intensified relentlessly. She became extremely upset, going so far as to threaten to end their relationship if he did not follow through with killing Daniel Raven. The texts showcased Trista's relentless coercion, transforming Ian's wavering resolve into a desperate need to act. A particularly chilling exchange occurred 2 days before the homicide. Ian texted Trista, pledging promise you, he will not make it till Monday morning. Trista's terse and demanding reply underscored her uncompromising nature. Don't make me promises you can keep. These communications, investigators reflected, graphically spelled out the sinister cocktail of persuasion, threats, and implicit violence that fueled the murder plot. The sheer brazenness and cold-blooded nature of these digital exchanges were unprecedented in the experience of the detectives. As the investigators meticulously delved deeper into the retrieved text messages, another critical piece of the puzzle emerged: the identification of a third conspirator. The text revealed a cryptic reference to a driver, indicated by the initials RB. One message explicitly stated, "Tell RB that we'll give him an extra $100 if we can get this done tonight." Further investigation into the timestamps proved crucial. Ian had received a text message from an RB at approximately 10:54 in the evening on the night of the murder, confirming that he was on his way. Less than 1.5 hours after this message was received, Daniel Raven was dead. Swift action was taken to identify the individual behind the phone number associated with RB. Ultimately, the person was identified as Robert McBain. With no apparent prior connection to the existing suspects, Trista and Ian, investigators immediately set out to locate and apprehend him. Detectives successfully tracked Robert McBain down at his workplace in the village of Cameron, also in Barron County. Initially, Robert McBain vehemently denied any involvement in the homicide. However, the investigators possessed powerful evidence in the form of the text messages, giving them a strong hand to play. They began to selectively reveal pieces of this damning information to McBain, strategically indicating that his denials were patently false. Under the weight of this irrefutable evidence, Robert gradually began to provide more details. He confessed to being friends with both Ian Shirley and Trista Hrabak, describing how they would regularly spend time together, sharing beers and drinks after work and on weekends. During these casual gatherings, he recalled Ian repeatedly making comments, often in a joking manner, about wishing Daniel was dead. McBain dismissed these earlier remarks as mere jokes, a common coping mechanism, he suggested, for anyone experiencing a difficult breakup. He emphasized that he had not initially taken them seriously. However, he eventually yielded to Ian's persistent requests and agreed to act as his driver. Robert McBain's confession continued to deepen. He admitted to having accompanied Ian Shirley on at least 6 prior occasions to the turkey farm, each time with the explicit intention of killing Daniel Hrabak. On these previous attempts, Ian would typically lose his nerve and back out, but on the fateful night of the 10th of March, Robert observed a different demeanor in Ian as he exited the car. This time, he appeared resolutely determined. McBain admitted to hearing 2 distinct gunshots, an experience that, he claimed, profoundly shocked him. He insisted he didn't realize Ian would actually go through with it, expressing disbelief that Ian actually did it. Following the shooting, Robert faithfully followed Ian's instructions, driving them to a nearby bridge, where they then concealed the rifle used in the murder. McBain's detailed and convincing account of hiding the murder weapon proved invaluable. Acting on his information, detectives successfully located the rifle underneath the bridge, providing crucial physical evidence that perfectly corroborated his confession. At the conclusion of his interview, Robert McBain was immediately arrested and transported to the Barron County Jail, charged with being a party to the crime of homicide, with McBain's comprehensive testimony effectively verifying the investigators' suspicions, and, more importantly, placing himself and identifying Ian Shirley as the individual who pulled the trigger at the scene of the crime. The time was ripe for another encounter with Ian Shirley. Armed with Robert McBain's full confession and the damning text messages, detectives confronted Ian Shirley again, leaving him with little room for denial regarding his role in Daniel Raven's murder. Ian, facing the overwhelming evidence, finally confessed to killing Daniel. He revealed that Trista had been desperate to eliminate Daniel, driven primarily by Daniel's threats to report her for alleged food stamp and welfare fraud. Trista, he explained, was terrified of facing federal prison. Ian described numerous instances where Robert McBain had driven him to Daniel's residence, only for him to be dropped off and ultimately unable to pull the trigger. However, Ian stressed that Trista left him with virtually no alternative. According to Ian, the 10th of March was presented by Trista as his absolute final opportunity to carry out the deed. She explicitly told him that their children would not be present at the farm that night, removing any potential impediment or moral dilemma related to their safety. On that night, Ian took a .30-06 rifle equipped with open sights. Robert McBain drove him to the turkey farm, following the prearranged plan. Upon arrival, Shirley approached the residence and, through a clear line of sight, observed Daniel Raven seated on a couch on the lower level. Initially, Ian hesitated once more, returning to the car. Yet, the intense pressure from Trista and the understanding that he could not fail her again gnawed at him. Ian McBain drove a short distance down the road, where Ian cleared ve kep hot ate appeared to be a jam in the rifle, ensuring the weapon was fully operational. With his resolve now hardened, he instructed McBain to drive him back to the farmhouse. He discharged the weapon, firing the 2 fatal shots. Overcome by extreme nervousness during the act, he admitted he was unsure exactly where he had struck Daniel, or if he had definitively hit him, though the devastating result spoke for itself. As they rapidly drove away from the scene, Ian stated that Trista, who was apparently monitoring a police scanner, sent them text message updates, relaying information about the police response. Once back at his own house, Ian meticulously carried out the next phase of their carefully constructed alibi. He traveled through the surrounding woods, entering the house through a rear door strategically positioned out of view of the surveillance cameras. He then revealed that the surveillance cameras he and Trista had ostensibly installed were, in fact, an elaborate deception. A ruse, as he called it. The camera's installation and the existence of this unseen walkway were deliberately planned components of their alibi, designed to create a false impression of their presence at home during the time of the murder. Ian's detailed confession proved to be a pivotal breakthrough, directly aligning with every piece of evidence painstakingly gathered at the crime scene. The caliber of the rifle he described matched perfectly with the weapons subsequently recovered. The 2 bullet casings found outside the broken glass door were consistent with the shots fired from that specific rifle. Furthermore, his account corroborated the distinct footprints noticed in the snow along the edge of the driveway and the precise location where a vehicle had been parked on the roadway adjacent to the property, supporting McBain's earlier statement. With his full confession aligning with the undeniable physical evidence, Ian Shirley was immediately placed under arrest and formally charged with the first-degree intentional homicide of Daniel Raven. Following the full, corroborating confessions of both Robert McBain and Ian Shirley, Trista Hrabak was also arrested and transported to the Barron County Jail. She, too, was charged with first-degree intentional homicide of Daniel Raven as a party to the crime. Trista's immediate reaction upon her arrest was to profess innocence, questioning, "Why am Mort being arrested?" Mort didn't to do anything. Even with the damning confessions from her co-conspirators, prosecutors understood that holding Trista accountable could present a formidable challenge in court. Trista, upon arrest, promptly asserted her right to an attorney and, unlike her co-conspirators, offered no confession, consistently maintaining her innocence, possibly believing that her indirect involvement would protect her from the most severe consequences. In the ensuing legal proceedings, Ian Shirley and Robert McBain, recognizing the overwhelming evidence against them, chose to enter guilty pleas to second-degree intentional homicide, thereby accepting responsibility for their roles in Daniel Raven's death. Ian Shirley received a sentence of 20 years in prison, followed by a period of 10 years of extended supervision. Robert McBain, in turn, was sentenced to 15 years in prison, also with 10 years of extended supervision. As the investigations broadened, interviewing extended to bar patrons, friends, and family members connected to the case. A word that emerged with unsettling consistency in these interviews was evil. This potent descriptor was frequently employed by those who knew Trista, painting a portrait of a truly malevolent individual. Ian's family provided profoundly scathing testimony against Trista, strongly asserting that she was the undeniable orchestrator behind the murder. While acknowledging Ian's culpability in pulling the trigger, they adamantly maintained that the idea was never his own. Before they even knew who Daniel was, the children sensed Trista's deep-seated hatred for their father. They described Trista as profoundly manipulative, asserting that she had fundamentally altered Ian's character. Those who knew Ian prior to his relationship with Trista insisted that he would never have committed such an act, describing him as having been completely consumed by Trista's influence. He had relocated from his home, sold all his possessions, and essentially surrendered his autonomy to her. The situation, his family believed, had deteriorated to such an extent that Ian saw no escape. They recounted instances where Trista would threaten suicide during their arguments, a tactic they viewed as yet another calculated act of manipulation to control him. The collective impression was that both Ian Shirley and Robert McBain were individuals susceptible to manipulation. Ian himself described Daniel Raven as a kind person, but was acutely aware of Trista's intense dislike for Daniel and her relentless desire to remove him from their lives. Robert McBain stated he had never personally met Daniel Raven, knowing him only through Trista Hrabak's fervent hatred. It became unequivocally apparent that Trista Hrabak was the true mastermind behind the murder plot, pulling the strings from the shadows. However, without a direct confession from Trista herself, or incontrovertible physical evidence directly linking her to the planning and execution beyond the texts, prosecutors faced the daunting prospect that she might be acquitted if the case went to a jury trial. The fear of a jury trial is always present in such complex cases, particularly when a defendant has maintained their innocence and actively attempted to shift blame. Recognizing these inherent risks, Trista's attorneys, perhaps sharing the prosecution's concerns about the uncertainties of a jury trial, ultimately accepted a plea deal. In February of the year 2015, Trista Hrabak was sentenced to 15 years of initial confinement, followed by a further 10 years of extended supervision. The sentences stirred a complex mix of emotions among Daniel's loved ones. Daniel's daughter, though not surprised by her father's 20-year sentence, expressed a profound sense of injustice, feeling that Trista should have received, at the very minimum, a sentence equivalent to Ian's. The fact that someone could meticulously plan a murder, involve multiple individuals, and orchestrate repeated attempts, yet receive a mere 15-year sentence, struck many as a cruel travesty of justice. For many, no sentence could truly be considered fair enough to atone for the life brutally taken. It falls beyond the purview of any single individual to judge the ultimate fairness of jhene outcomes, a responsibility that ultimately rests with the justice system. Yet despite the complexities and imperfections of the legal process, Daniel Raven's memory lives on. Every year, his cousins, friends, and family gather for a special guys camping weekend, a tradition where Daniel's ashes are respectfully scattered, and where they collectively honor his spirit, recounting old stories and sharing memories. There is a tangible memorial erected in his honor, a place where they return annually to camp, spending cherished time remembering Daniel. His loved ones express a profound sense that Daniel continues to watch over them, inspiring them to live their best lives in his memory. They yearn for Daniel to be remembered, not for the difficult struggles and tragic circumstances surrounding his relationship with Trista, but for the abundant good times, for the vibrant spirit he embodied, and for the lasting impact he had on all who knew him. He is remembered, and he will always be remembered, a constant presence in the lives of those who loved him, a testament to the enduring power of human connection, even in the face of profound loss. This tragic case offers several profound insights into the motives behind such heinous crimes and the intricacies of criminal investigation. At its core, the motive for Daniel Raven's murder stemmed from a potent cocktail of fear, greed, and deeply entrenched resentment. Trista Hrabak's fear of exposure for alleged welfare and food stamp fraud, coupled with her desire to maintain financial control through child support payments, appears to have been the primary catalyst. Daniel's threats to reveal her misdeeds represented a direct threat to her perceived security and freedom, culminating in a desperate resolve to eliminate him. This case starkly illustrates how unresolved personal conflicts, especially when intertwined with financial disputes and legal vulnerabilities, can fester into dangerous obsessions. When one party believes their reputation, financial stability, or freedom is jeopardized by another, and they perceive no legal or moral constraint, extreme measures become frighteningly possible. The reasons why such cases occur often lie in these complex, deeply personal conflicts where emotions overwhelm rational thought and an individual's desire for self-preservation or gain eclipses any regard for human life. The repeated nature of Ian's attempts, spurred on by Trista, demonstrates the relentless psychological pressure and manipulation that can drive a perpetrator to finally act. It wasn't a spontaneous act, but a carefully deliberated, though repeatedly delayed plan. From an investigative standpoint, the police relied on a crucial blend of traditional detective work and modern technological analysis to track down the perpetrators. The initial crime scene analysis was paramount, meticulously documenting the broken glass, the shell casings, and the critical perfect angle from the porch, all pointing to a deliberate, external shooting. The identification of tracks around the house and from the roadway was a traditional but invaluable clue, suggesting premeditation and an attempt at concealment. The detective's careful observation of Tiffany Workman as genuine emotional distress was crucial in quickly establishing her as a non-suspect, allowing them to narrow their focus. Testimonies from friends and family, consistently pointing towards Trista Hrabak due to her contentious history with Daniel, provided invaluable directional guidance. The social worker's unsolicited report about Ian Shirley's chilling offhanded comment served as a critical inflection point, elevating Ian and Trista from mere persons of interest to prime suspects. However, it was the forensic examination of digital evidence, specifically the cell phone records, that truly broke the case wide open. The text messages between Trista and Ian, revealing the explicit planning, the repeated attempts, the threats, and the ultimate commitment to the act, were irrefutable proof of a conspiracy. The identification of a third conspirator, Robert McBain, through these very same text messages, specifically the payment for his role as a driver and his notification that he was on his way, showed the incredible power of metadata and digital communication in unraveling a plot. The police strategic use of this evidence during McBain's interrogation, gradually revealing what they knew, successfully coerced his confession, which then provided the crucial physical evidence of the hidden murder weapon. This recovery, in turn, directly corroborated his and ultimately Ian's confessions, linking them irrefutably to the crime scene through matching ballistic evidence and corroborating details like the vehicle parking location and footprints. The sophistication of the criminals in this case was moderate. They attempted to create an alibi using fabricated surveillance camera evidence, parked off-site, and disposed of the weapon. However, their reliance on explicit text messaging for planning and coercion, combined with the impulsive emotional outburst to a social worker, represented significant loopholes. The sheer volume and damning nature of the digital evidence ultimately proved to be their undoing. Their criminal sophistication was outweighed by their emotional imprudence and their dependence on digital communication as a planning tool, which, while convenient, left an indelible trail for investigators to follow. The life lessons derived from this tragic case are numerous and profoundly significant, offering insights into human behavior and the critical importance of healthy conflict resolution. First and foremost, the case underscores the perilous escalation that can occur when deeply personal conflicts, especially those involving financial stakes, are allowed to fester without healthy and lawful resolution. Daniel Raven's threats to expose Trista's alleged fraud, while potentially justified, pushed Trista into a corner from which she felt there was no escape other than the ultimate extreme. This highlights the crucial need for individuals to seek professional intervention, such as counseling or mediation, to navigate toxic relationships and disputes, rather than allowing resentment and fear to drive them to destructive ends. It also serves as a stark warning about the insidious nature of manipulation within relationships. Trista's control over Ian, demonstrated through threats and emotional blackmail, shows how a dominant personality can coerce a more pliable individual into unthinkable acts. Recognizing the signs of such unhealthy dynamics, isolation, controlling behavior, threats is vital for those caught in similar webs, to empower them to seek help and break free before tragedy strikes. Furthermore, the case vividly illustrates that even in seemingly close-knit communities, sinister plots can unfold unnoticed. This calls for a greater sense of community awareness and a willingness to speak up when something seems profoundly amiss, as the social worker courageously did. From the perspective of law enforcement, this case provides invaluable experience on how to catch perpetrators more swiftly. The critical importance of robust information sharing between various agencies cannot be overstated. The timely communication from the Department of Health and Human Services caseworker to the Sheriff's Department was a game changer. Had that vital piece of information, Ian's offhand but revealing comment, not been shared, the focus of the investigation might have remained diffuse for a longer period. This emphasizes the need for streamlined, cross-agency communication protocols, ensuring that seemingly disparate pieces of information can be quickly consolidated and analyzed within the broader context of an investigation. Secondly, the case powerfully demonstrates the growing significance of digital forensics. In modern criminal investigations, cell phone records, social media interactions, and other forms of electronic communication often provide an unvarnished window into criminal intent and conspiracy. Investing in advanced digital forensic capabilities and training for law enforcement personnel is no longer optional but essential. The ability to rapidly subpoena, analyze, and interpret vast amounts of digital data can drastically reduce the time it takes to identify suspects and gather irrefutable evidence. Furthermore, the strategy of piecemeal confrontation, where investigators strategically reveal elements of their evidence to a suspect to encourage cooperation or confession, proved highly effective with Robert McBain. This highlights the psychological acumen required in interrogations, emphasizing that a strong, evidence-based approach, rather than purely confrontational tactics, can often be more successful in eliciting truth from reluctant conspirators. Finally, the case underlines the value of revisiting suspects, particularly when new evidence emerges. The initial interviews with Ian and Trista did not yield confessions, but the subsequent confrontations, armed with the devastating text messages and McBain's confession, left them with no choice but to reveal their involvement. This flexible approach to investigation, allowing for continuous reevaluation and adaptation based on incoming information, is paramount for expedient case resolution. In essence, while the tools and techniques evolve, the foundational principles of vigilant observation, methodical evidence collection, psychological insight, and seamless information flow remain the cornerstones of effective law enforcement, crucial in bringing justice to victims and upholding the sanctity of peace within our communities. The narrative of Daniel Raven's untimely death serves as a somber reminder of the vulnerabilities of human relationships, the potential for manipulation, and the persistent, diligent efforts required to maintain justice in the face of malice. In a tranquil corner of a small Midwestern town, where the rhythms of farming life usually dictated the daily pace, an unsettling silence descended on the 10th of March in the year 2014, just after the stroke of midnight. This was not the peace of a sleeping village, but the ominous stillness following an act of profound violence. The world was about to learn of the tragic demise of Daniel Raven, a hardworking farmer whose life was abruptly and cruelly extinguished in what would appear, to even the most seasoned investigators, as a meticulously orchestrated and callous planned hit. The very air inside his home in Barron, Wisconsin, now carried the pungent, unforgettable scent of gunpowder, a stark and chilling testament to the brutality that had just unfolded. The victim, Daniel, bore extensive trauma across the left and middle regions of his face, injuries that spoke volumes of the sheer force and destructive intent behind the assault. The initial findings at the scene hinted at a calculated precision, a grim ballet of murder. A perfect, unobstructed angle existed from the front porch, extending directly into the basement where Daniel lay deceased on a couch. It was as if the assailant had carefully scouted the location, understanding exactly where their target would be vulnerable. Further compounding the sinister nature of the act, tracks were discovered winding around the periphery of the house, indicating that a person had approached with caution, perhaps observing, plotting, before making their fatal move. The grim assessment from law enforcement was immediate and equivocal. This was indeed a hit, a cold, unfeeling act designed ve kepite hat absolute finality. But in such a close-knit, rural community, suspicion could fall on anyone, transforming a familiar face into a potential wolf, cloaked in sheep-s apparel. When questioned about the unfolding horror, one individual's emphatic denial, "Hell no, Mort have better things to do," would later be juxtaposed against the grim reality that would gradually come to light. The ensuing investigation would peel back layers of deception and expose a deeply toxic family dynamic, ultimately revealing the extreme measures one individual was willing to undertake to conceal their misdeeds and silence a threat. The underlying tension, the very fuse leading to this explosion of violence, appeared to be Daniel's threat to expose certain individuals for welfare fraud, a betrayal that carried severe potential consequences for those involved. Just 2 days prior to the homicide, a chilling text message surfaced, a foreboding whisper in the digital realm. "Mott promise you, he will not make it till Monday morning." Yet even with such stark warnings, the grim reality of the act was almost unimaginable to those who heard it. Mort never thought in a million years he'd actually do it, One person would later attest a testament to the shocking nature of the crime. The air, even in the days following, seemed thick with a terrible apprehension, a lingering dread. The fateful call came in shortly after midnight on March the 10th, in the year 2014, shaking the quiet foundations of Barron, Wisconsin. Tiffany Workman, Daniel Raven's girlfriend, dialed 911, her voice a tremor of rising panic, reporting that her boyfriend, Daniel, had sustained injuries to his shoulder. Her memories of that harrowing conversation were vivid, particularly the emergency dispatcher's question about a heartbeat. She recounted pressing her cheek to his forehead, feeling the lingering warmth, yet detecting no pulse, only an unsettling stillness. "He is hurting," she'd pleaded, a desperate hope clinging to her words. Mordn't know if he is sleeping or just passed out. Dispatchers, recognizing the palpable hysteria in her voice, immediately sent an ambulance, but also police officers, understanding the potential gravity of the situation beyond a mere injury. Tiffany recounted to the deputy that she and Daniel had engaged in an argument earlier that night, leading him to retreat to the couch in their game room, presumably to sleep. A short while later, a sudden, loud noise shattered the stillness of the night, jolting her awake. She remembered a distinct slam, and upon investigation, discovered that the glass on their screen door was shattered. The sight that greeted her downstairs was a nightmare manifest. Blood everywhere. Approaching Daniel on the couch, the stark realization that something was profoundly wrong washed over her. Having never been a hunter, the pungent odor of gunpowder within her own home was an alien and terrifying sensation, a smell she knew would forever be etched in her memory. The deputy, maintaining professional calm amidst the unfolding chaos, escorted emergency medical technicians into the residence, where a bloody and disturbing scene awaited them. The first responders quickly made the grim determination that Daniel Raven was indeed deceased. It was unmistakably clear that he had suffered extensive trauma to his upper left bicep, compounded by significant injuries to his face, indicating a violent and forceful attack. As more deputies were dispatched to secure the scene, a critical discovery was made on the ground outside the shattered glass doors: 2 empty shell casings. These spent rounds, upon examination, were clearly from a long rifle, not a pistol or a shotgun, narrowing the scope of the weapon used. With the presence of the casings outside and the victim's body found downstairs, it became unequivocally clear to the investigators that they were dealing with a homicide. Tiffany, however, still clung to a fragile hope, unaware of the grim finality. "Mortide. Idide." Nord realized that he was actually dead, she stated. "Mort was under the impression that you guys are here to help him. You were going to get him out of here, and you were going to save him, and he is going to be fine." Her heartfelt expectation underscored the sudden, shocking nature of the loss. Daniel Raven, born on the 16th of February in the year 1981, had spent nearly his entire life immersed in the rich rural tapestry of Wisconsin. The youngest of 3 children, he was raised on a dairy farm, a setting that forged strong bonds and instilled a robust work ethic. His family recalled a childhood filled with closeness, surrounded by a multitude of friends and relatives. Countless hours were spent in their barn, engaged in both work and play, their days punctuated by adventures like camping and fishing, or simply roaming the vast pastures, crafting their own amusement in the absence of urban diversions. Daniel's father, a figure of diligence and industry, passed on his dedication, a trait Daniel embraced fully, becoming an extremely hard worker in his own right. His very first job he began as a sophomore in high school, working as a dairy aide primarily engaged in the demanding task of milking cows. Between his demanding work schedule and his academic pursuits, Daniel found his life to be exceedingly busy. Yet he carved out time for a young woman who had captured his attention. Trista Hrabak. Like Daniel, Trista had grown up in the local area within a close-knit family, her presence familiar within their shared social circle from high school, which served as the nexus for their burgeoning relationship. They began dating. Their courtship filled ve kepte hat activities. They both cherished hiking, four-wheeling, simply enjoying each other. Company. Trista possessed a certain charm, an innate ability to achieve what she desired. A few years into their relationship, Trista announced she was pregnant, a surprise that was met with immense happiness from Daniel. Their daughter was born mere months before his oldest daughter, and a couple of years later, a little boy arrived, further cementing Daniel's joy and his burgeoning family life. After 7 years of shared experiences and the blessings of 2 children, Daniel and Trista decided to solemnize their union in the year 2005. When the news of their impending marriage circulated, a close friend approached Daniel, asking if he was truly sure, knowing the friction that sometimes arose between them. Daniel confided that their relationship often involved considerable fighting and arguments. Yet, he expressed his desire to formally build a family with her, a commitment underscored by the fact they already shared children. Daniel's devotion to his children was undeniable. He would take them hunting and fishing, striving to spend every possible moment with them. A few years later, Daniel and Trista embarked on a new joint venture, venturing into the culinary world by operating a cafe within the local livestock auction building, a place affectionately known as the Bullwhip Cafe at Mofe, the sales barn in Barron, Wisconsin. The enterprise, believed to have been inherited or taken over from Trista's parents, or specifically her mother, initially thrived under their combined efforts. However, as they entered their early 30s, the cumulative stresses of managing a restaurant business while raising a family began to exact a heavy toll on the fabric of Daniel and Trista's marriage. Daniel's friends recalled numerous instances where he would call visibly upset, his struggle evident in his voice. Like many married couples, they faced their problems. But for Daniel, the more he strove to make things work, the more arduous and intractable their difficulties seemed to become. Their relationship was characterized by a repetitive cycle of conflict, separation, attempts at reconciliation, and then, inevitably, another break. It became a pattern, deeply embedded, where hope for lasting peace often dissolved into renewed discord. One friend recalled thinking this cycle marked the final straw, believing Daniel would finally concede that the love he sought was no longer reciprocated. Daniel's unhappiness grew to such an extent that he eventually moved out, securing his own separate dwelling. After 8 tumultuous years as a married couple, Daniel and Trista formally divorced in the year 2013. They agreed to shared custody of their children, a compromise that, while providing contact, left Daniel feeling a deep sadness over the limited time he now had with his beloved children. Professionally, Daniel dedicated himself to managing turkey barns, a demanding occupation that often required him to be active from sunup to sundown. This agricultural life was consuming, leaving him little opportunity for much else, as his days were perpetually anchored to the farm. In the aftermath of his divorce, Daniel entered a period of depression, followed by a time where he engaged in heavy drinking. He was undoubtedly profoundly saddened by the entire unraveling of his marriage and family unit. A new chapter began for Daniel, and his life seemed to take a positive turn when he encountered Tiffany Workman. Their connection initially blossomed through their shared workplace, evolving from a professional acquaintance into a genuine friendship. Tiffany, too, hailed from a similar farm background, fostering an immediate sense of understanding and camaraderie between them. They simply hit it off, a comforting naturalness to their burgeoning relationship. For Daniel's loved ones, witnessing his renewed happiness with Tiffany was a welcome sight, observing him feeling good about himself and life again. Like Daniel, Tiffany was also divorced and a parent to 2 children of her own. Their relationship deepened, leading them to move into a house together on the farm where they both worked. Tiffany observed Daniel's remarkable egalitarianism with their blended families. He treated her children with the same warmth and care as his own, a quality she found truly amazing. Their blended family, it seemed, meshed together wonderfully. Tiffany's presence clearly had a transformative effect on Daniel. He appeared to have found his stride once more, back in his groove, as if a long-endured storm had finally passed. However, this newfound tranquility was brutally shattered when Tiffany discovered Daniel shot to death. Now, seasoned detectives from the Barron County Sheriff's Department were meticulously analyzing the crime scene, piecing together the grim narrative of what transpired. The critical angle from the front porch provided an unhindered view directly to the couch in the basement where Daniel had been. It suggested a cold, deliberate act. Somebody walked up to the outside of the door, did not attempt to make entry, fired 2 rounds through the door, making what would be perfect shots at a victim lying defenseless. The discovery of tracks leading from the roadway and circling the house further painted a picture of premeditation. The perpetrator, it appeared, had spent time observing the residence before moving into position for the fatal shots. These tracks also indicated that the individual had parked their vehicle discreetly out on the roadway and had then traversed along a tree line, a tactic employed to conceal their identity and avoid detection. Following their exhaustive inspection of the house and its environs, the investigators formed a compelling belief. There was a clear connection between the shooter and the victim. This was not a random act of violence. It was profoundly personal. It was, as one seasoned observer remarked, truly as much of a hit as Mott have ever seen. As Tiffany was the first to discover the body and the only person awake in the residence at the time of the horrific discovery, she was naturally brought to the station for further questioning. The barrage of questions, probing the events, the who, what, and why, disoriented her. What did Mott do? Mott day note? Mott day note? Even know what's going on? She protested. Her words laced, they kept a hot confusion and distress. It was during this interview that investigators delivered the devastating confirmation that Daniel was, in fact, deceased. Her reaction was visceral. She began to sob uncontrollably, her grief manifesting in raw, unbridled emotion. It became acutely apparent to the officers that she had been genuinely unaware of his passing, having harbored a desperate hope for his survival.
Just wish.
This was a dream, she murmured, a sentiment echoing the profound shock of her experience. While officers acknowledged that some individuals could be skilled actors, Tiffany's profound distress, her genuine, unfeigned reaction to the news, strongly suggested she was not involved. Nevertheless, the cold reality of criminal investigation demanded that every possibility be considered, for one truly never knew the full extent of a person involvement until all avenues were exhausted. As the investigation pressed forward, police continued their questioning of Tiffany, delving deeper into the events that immediately preceded Daniel's murder. seeking any lead, any fragment of information that could point to the perpetrator. "Who do you think is capable of this?" they inquired, seeking to understand the landscape of Daniel's relationships and potential adversaries. It was during these interviews that crucial evidence began to surface, hinting at a deep-seated scheme. A calculated plot lurking beneath the surface of seemingly normal interactions. Tiffany revealed a conversation with Daniel that occurred shortly before his death. He had shown her a substantial stack of papers about this thick, containing incriminating information he had gathered concerning this stick that he had on her, referring to a collection of alleged misdeeds by his ex-wife. The Barron County Sheriff S Department, now fully engaged in a meticulous murder investigation into the death of 33-year-old turkey farmer Daniel Raven, continued to piece together the narrative. With Tiffany, his current girlfriend, tentatively ruled out as a primary suspect due to her verifiable reaction and lack of incriminating evidence, their hope hinged on her ability to furnish further leads. They requested her to meticulously describe the events of the evening preceding the shooting. Tiffany recounted picking up her 2 children from her ex-husband, who had weekend visitation on Sunday evening, somewhere between 6:30 and 7 o'clock. Upon returning to the residence, she found Daniel downstairs, absorbed in watching television, having had a few drinks. They had, unusually for them, engaged in an argument earlier that day, a deviation from their usual dynamic that had struck her as peculiar even at the time. "This is just weird, like something weird is going on," she remembered thinking. Daniel had communicated that he was not coming downstairs further that evening, and according to Tiffany's recollection, that was the last time she saw him alive. The physical evidence found at the crime scene appeared to largely corroborate Tiffany's account. Investigators confirmed they could find no firearm within the residence, nor were there any tracks that would suggest a weapon might have been removed and subsequently discarded. The question now became, if it wasn't Tiffany, then who could possibly be responsible for such a heinous act? What hidden currents of conflict had been flowing beneath the surface of Daniel's life? Tiffany shed light on her own turbulent history with Daniel's ex-wife, describing their relationship as marked by a lot of rough patches, punctuated by domestic issues. She admitted, been scared of him at times. Her ex-husband, typically working out of state, had, however, been in Barron County during the weekend of Daniel's homicide, a detail of particular interest to investigators. But Tiffany pointedly brought to the forefront that she was not the only individual in Daniel's life burdened by a disgruntled ex-partner. She meticulously described the contentious divorce proceedings and the ongoing, often acrimonious child support hearings that had defined the relationship between Daniel Raven and Trista Hrabak. In November of the year 2013, Daniel's attorney had formally sent a letter to the court initiating a hearing to request a modification in child support payments. Daniel was currently paying a sum of $256 each month and sought to have this amount reduced, based on his belief that Trista had been earning significantly more income than she had formally reported. The plan was concrete. Daniel was scheduled to appear in court with Trista that very week, armed with a lawyer and all the necessary documentation to present his case. This impending legal challenge, Tiffany stated, was profoundly upsetting to Trista. Daniel had confided in Tiffany, offering a chilling premonition. "Tiff, if anything ever happens, it's her. It's Trista." Following Tiffany's detailed interview, police indeed found substantial evidence that supported her claims. The relationship between Daniel and Trista had been characterized by a plethora of ongoing, often minor, complaints against one another, encompassing alleged violations of child custody agreements and instances of negative, confrontational contact. Daniel held 50-50 custody of their children with Trista and was obligated to pay child support. However, Daniel vehemently claimed that Trista had resorted to extreme lengths in her efforts to extract more money. He had informed Tiffany that Trista was allegedly falsifying records, strategically manipulating her income reports to portray herself as earning less, thereby attempting to continue to bleed him as much as she could through ongoing support payments. Crucially, shortly before his untimely death, Daniel had approached Tiffany, displaying that very thick stack of papers, his meticulous dossier detailing Trista's alleged fraudulent activities. These included accusations related to food stamp misuse and lying on her taxes, effectively accusing her of underreporting and entirely failing to report income to the court system. Such allegations had compelled Daniel to seek legal counsel, leading him to engage an attorney and initiate further hearings to address these discrepancies. Tragically, Daniel was murdered before these legal proceedings could advance to court, and, notably, Trista was never formally charged with any crimes related to these specific allegations. Daniel's loved ones, devastated by the news of his death, universally echoed Tiffany's suspicions. Throughout their interviews with investigators, everyone consistently and repeatedly mentioned Trista's name, expressing a strong belief that she had some involvement, or was indeed behind, this terrible crime. However, before confronting Trista, detectives meticulously worked to eliminate other potential suspects, particularly Tiffany's ex-husband, whose past turbulent relationship with Tiffany also made him a person of interest. Tiffany's ex-husband provided a verifiable alibi. He confirmed he had his children on the day prior to the homicide and had dropped them off with Tiffany in the afternoon. From there, he spent the evening out, drinking with friends, returning home between 2 and 2:30 in the morning, where he turned in for the night. He was unwavering in his assertion that he had absolutely no involvement in Daniel's death. Investigators rigorously pursued and confirmed all the names and establishments provided by the ex-husband, verifying his alibi without discrepancy. With his story thoroughly corroborated, Tiffany's ex-husband was officially ruled out as a suspect. Of the 3 initial individuals considered, detectives now narrowed their focus, unequivocally turning their attention to Trista. The convergence of Tiffany's statements and the existing knowledge of the officers regarding Trista's contentious history with Daniel cemented the decision to scrutinize her very closely. Prior to directly engaging Trista Hrabak about the escalating conflicts with Daniel Raven, particularly concerning child support, investigators sought deeper insights into their shared history by speaking with Daniel's family. A telling incident emerged from these discussions. Daniel had once called a family member, deeply disturbed, recounting how he had been cleaning out his blazer and stumbled upon a sawed-off shotgun concealed beneath the seat. Both Daniel and his family member firmly believed that Trista had planted the weapon there, a malevolent act intended to entrap him. Given Daniel's past felony conviction, being caught in possession of a firearm would have constituted a felony in possession charge, a serious offense that could have easily landed him in prison for a duration of 2 years. Although this alarming incident was never formally reported to the authorities, and no charges were consequently filed against Trista, Daniel's response was immediate and reciprocal. He retaliated by threatening to expose Trista for what he vehemently claimed was criminal fraud related to the egregious misapplication of food stamps. He had specifically informed a family member that she was allegedly utilizing Wisconsin food stamps to purchase food supplies for the restaurant even after their separation, a clear violation, implying this illicit practice was the only means by which she could sustain the Cafe's operation. Furthermore, Daniel asserted that Trista had consistently failed to report this income to the relevant authorities. While some believed Daniel's threats were largely empty threats, simply a method to get back at her, the underlying tensions they represented were undeniable and deeply concerning. As the investigation continued to unfold, detectives received a pivotal new lead. The Barron County Sheriff's Department was contacted by a social caseworker from the Department of Health and Human Services, who informed the Communications Center that she possessed important information potentially relevant to the ongoing murder case. The social worker recounted that she had been tasked with interviewing Trista Hrabak and her new live-in boyfriend, Ian Shirley, in response to a complaint lodged by Ian's ex-wife. Ian's ex-wife had filed a report shortly before the homicide, spurred by disquieting observations and statements from her own daughters, who expressed discomfort with Trista's behavior. The girls reported that Trista often seemed to ignore them when they were present, acting as if they did not exist, and at times they were even forced to sleep on the floor. Ian's children also expressed their evolving perceptions of Trista. Initially, they had felt a degree of happiness for their father, as he had long been deeply affected by his divorce from their mother. His new relationship with Trista seemed like a step towards moving on. However, over time, Trista began to demonstrate a palpable dislike for Ian's daughters. The girls perceived Trista as intensely manipulative, viewing her as someone for whom their feelings were secondary, asserting that it was always her way or my way. They also described instances of domestic discord between Ian and Trista, noting that Trista would attempt to hit their father, who was, inexplicably, not permitted to defend himself. Compounding the unsettling atmosphere, the children were sometimes woken in the middle of the night and drawn into their parents' heated arguments. These conflicts, it seemed, often centered on Trista's ex-husband, Daniel. It was during these interviews that Ian Shirley made an alarming, offhanded comment to the social worker. While being questioned about his living arrangements and actions with Trista Hrabak, Shirley remarked that the quickest and easiest way to end this conflict is to kill Dan Hrabak. This statement, seemingly made in passing, resonated deeply with the social worker and provided a chilling new dimension to the developing investigation. Armed with this profoundly disturbing piece of information, detectives immediately initiated the process of subpoenaing phone records for both Ian Shirley and Trista Hrabak. While awaiting the processing of this crucial request, investigators located the couple at a local restaurant 2 days after Daniel's shooting. They discreetly approached Ian, pulling him aside into the parking lot for an impromptu questioning. Ian claimed that he and Trista had been together on the night Daniel was killed. He stated that on March the 9th, he and Trista had visited a local bar, and at approximately 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the evening, they had left, intending to travel to rural New Auburn, a location roughly 20 miles distant. Ian further asserted that he only became aware of Daniel Raven's death at around 6 o'clock the following morning, a time when he claimed his phone was inundated with calls and messages from various people asking what had transpired. Following their conversation with Ian in the parking lot, The detectives entered the cafe, where they met with Trista in a more secluded area in the back. Trista, in contrast to the underlying tensions previously reported, downplayed any recent significant conflict between herself and Daniel. When directly confronted with the question of her potential involvement in Daniel S.'s death, she unequivocally denied any responsibility. However, the detectives remained unconvinced by her denials. They found her narrative to be overly rehearsed, almost scripted. Such a meticulously presented story, rather than lending credibility, actually raised their suspicions. It served to solidify, rather than alleviate, their belief that both Trista and Ian were deeply implicated in Daniel S.'s murder, elevating them further on their suspect list. Yet, at this juncture, the investigators still required more tangible evidence to initiate formal charges. Without a confession, they lacked the crucial physical links needed to definitively tie Trista to the crime. They needed more, something beyond mere suspicion and circumstantial accounts. The waiting period for the cell phone records felt interminable, but once they arrived, detectives immediately plunged into a meticulous review of the data. What they discovered within the digital exchanges between Trista Hrabak and Ian Shirley was not only relevant, but profoundly disturbing. The text messages were chilling, unlike anything many of the seasoned officers had ever encountered. A dark narrative of a murder plot began to unfold within those digital words. The text records unequivocally indicated that there had been multiple prior attempts, on at least 6 separate occasions, where Ian had driven to Daniel Raven's turkey farm with the explicit intention of murdering him, only to back out at the last moment. With each failed attempt, Trista's pressure on Ian intensified. Her frustration escalated to the point where she resorted to threats, warning Ian that she would end their relationship if he failed to go through with killing Daniel Raven. The emotional and psychological manipulation was starkly evident. Just 2 days before the actual homicide, Ian sent a text message to Trista, promising, "Mote promise you, he will not make it till Monday morning." Trista's chilling response underscored her unwavering resolve. "Don't make me promises you can to keep." The sequence of persuasion, veiled threats, and the implicit violence was meticulously laid bare in these text messages, a testament to a premeditated and desperate scheme, a revelation unprecedented in the investigators' experience. These deeply unsettling texts did not just expose the core conspirators. They also unveiled the involvement of a third accomplice. While meticulously analyzing the messages, detectives identified what they presumed to be a driver, an individual integral to the execution of the plot. A particularly incriminating text message stated, "Tell RB that we'll give him an extra $100 if we can get this done tonight." This message clearly implicated an individual identified only by the initials RB. Further investigation of the records revealed that Ian had received a text message from RB at approximately 10:54 Fenmim on the night of the murder, confirming that he was on his way. Less than an hour and a half after this critical message, Daniel Raven was brutally murdered. Using this phone number, investigators initiated steps to identify the individual behind the initials. Ultimately, the mystery man was identified as Robert McBain. With a new suspect identified, who had no apparent direct connection to the main conspirators other than through Ian, investigators diligently tracked down Robert McBain at his workplace in the village of Cameron, also within Barron County. Initially, Robert McBain, when confronted by detectives, adamantly denied any involvement in the homicide. However, the investigators held a powerful advantage: the irrefutable evidence of the text messages. Slowly, they began to strategically reveal fragments of this digital evidence, subtly indicating that his denials were demonstrably false. Faced with this mounting pressure, Robert gradually began to divulge more information. He admitted to being friends with both Ian Shirley and Trista Hrabak, describing how they would frequently socialize, sharing beers and drinks after work and on weekends. He recalled several occasions during these gatherings where Ian would comment, often while drinking, that they wished Daniel was dead. Robert initially dismissed these remarks, stating, "We made jokes about it, but that's about it." When pressed by investigators about the nature of these jokes, he offered a cynical rationalization. Who doesn't want to make jokes about the power from your ex? Robert maintained that he initially did not take their remarks seriously, but eventually he conceded to acting as Ian's driver. He shockingly admitted that he had, in fact, accompanied Ian Shirley on at least 6 prior attempts to the turkey farm, each time with the explicit intention of killing Daniel Raven. On those previous occasions, Ian had invariably backed out, losing his nerve. But on the fateful night of March the 10th, Robert described Ian's demeanor as distinctly different. As Ian exited the car, Robert perceived a determined resoluteness in him, a grim commitment he hadn't witnessed before. Robert then recounted hearing 2 distinct gunshots. The sound had stunned him. Mort was like, "What the hell?" he exclaimed, conveying his surprise at Ian's actual execution of the plan. Because Mort didn't realize he did it, yeah. Mort was like, "Oh, that never was thought of in years." Following the shooting, Robert confirmed that he had followed Ian's explicit directions. They drove to a nearby bridge where they meticulously concealed the rifle used in the murder. McBain's detailed account of hiding the weapon proved to be highly credible and invaluable to the investigation. Detectives subsequently searched the location, and true to McBain's word, they successfully recovered the murder weapon. At the conclusion of his interview, Robert McBain was arrested and transported to the Barron County Jail, facing charges as a party to the crime of homicide. With Robert McBain's confession having not only corroborated the investigators' existing knowledge, but also having placed Bayote Hot himself and, crucially, Ian Shirley at the scene, confirming Ian as the person who actually pulled the trigger, it was now time for the detectives to confront Ian Shirley once more. After the overwhelming weight of damning text messages and a full confession from the getaway driver, detectives returned to confront Ian Shirley about his role in the killing of Daniel Raven. Ian, now faced with irrefutable evidence, began to describe Trista's desperate urgency to eliminate Daniel from their lives. He revealed to the investigators that Daniel had been consistently threatening to expose Trista and him for engaging in food stamp and welfare fraud. Trista, in particular, was gripped by a profound fear that these accusations, if proven, would lead to federal prison. Ian recounted numerous instances where McBain had driven him to Daniel's residence, only for Ian to be dropped off and ultimately fail to pull the trigger due to cold feet. However, Ian asserted that Trista provided him with very little choice in the matter. According to Ian's confession, March the 10th marked his final opportunity. Trista made it clear there would be no more delays. She ensured that Daniel and Trista's children would not be present at the residence on that specific night, thereby eliminating any potential emotional obstacles for Ian. Equipped with a .306 rifle, fitted with open sights, Ian and McBain drove to the turkey farm. Shirley proceeded to the residence and, through an observation point, confirmed that Daniel Raven was indeed seated on a couch in the lower level of the home. Initially, Ian returned to the car, grappling with his apprehension, Yet, he knew, deep down, that he could not afford to fail Trista again. This was his moment of truth, his opportunity to claim the attempt had once more failed. However, after driving a short distance down the road, Ian cleared what appeared to be a jam in the rifle, ensured the weapon was fully operational, and instructed McBain to drive him back to the scene. He later admitted to investigators that, due to his intense nervousness at the time, he was unsure precisely where his shots had struck Daniel, or even if they had struck him at all. As they hastily drove away from the crime scene, Ian revealed a chilling detail. Trista was actively texting them updates, having monitored a police scanner for initial emergency response communications, attempting to guide their movements and keep them abreast of the unfolding law enforcement activity. Once back at his own house, Ian meticulously carried out a pre-arranged alibi strategy. He made his way through the woods, entering the residence through a rear door that was deliberately positioned out of the view of the surveillance cameras. He confessed that he and Trista had intentionally installed these surveillance cameras as part of an elaborate ruse, carefully planning their placement and creating a specific walkway that remained hidden from their view. This entire setup was designed to support their fabricated alibi, creating a false impression that they were at home and entirely unaware of the events unfolding at Daniel S. Farm. After hearing Ian S. detailed confession, investigators were able to meticulously corroborate his account with the physical evidence gathered at the crime scene. The caliber of the recovered rifle perfectly matched the 2 bullet casings found outside the shattered door. His description of events aligned precisely with the footprints originally observed in the snow along the edge of the driveway, as well as the position where a vehicle had been parked on the roadway. Adjacent to the driveway, Ian Shirley was subsequently placed under arrest and formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide in the murder of Daniel Raven. The full and compelling confessions from both Robert McBain and Ian Shirley provided the critical evidence needed to finally apprehend the alleged mastermind. Trista Hrabak was subsequently arrested and transported to the Barron County Jail. She too was charged with first-degree intentional homicide of Daniel Raven as a party to the crime, recognizing her central role in instigating and orchestrating the murder. Trista's initial response to the arresting officers was a defiant question. Why am Moat being arrested? Moat didn't do anything. Even with the detailed confessions from her co-conspirators, prosecutors understood that securing a conviction against Trista could prove to be an uphill battle. Trista, exercising her right to legal counsel, had remained steadfast in her refusal to confess, actively blaming Ian for his actions and characterizing McBain as merely an accomplice who simply went along with it. Her strategic denial added complexity to the prosecution's task. Following their comprehensive confessions and acknowledging their roles in Daniel Raven's death, both Ian Shirley and Robert McBain entered guilty pleas to charges of second-degree intentional homicide. Ian Shirley received a sentence of 20 years in prison, while Robert McBain was sentenced to 15 years. As investigators continued to interview peripheral individuals connected to the case, bar patrons, friends, and other family members, a single, consistent word emerged as the predominant descriptor for Trista Hrabak: evil. It was a powerful, unvarnished label that resonated widely throughout the community. Ian's family provided particularly scathing testimony, illuminating the extent of Trista's influence and manipulation. They firmly believed Trista was the true force behind the murder, while acknowledging Ian's direct culpability in pulling the trigger and the necessity of him facing consequences, they adamantly asserted. But this was not his idea. Never. Ian S. family revealed that even before they knew who Daniel Raven was, their children knew Trista harbored intense animosity towards their father. They characterized Trista as profoundly manipulative, asserting that she had fundamentally altered Ian as a person. Those who knew him well were convinced that he would never have conceived of such a terrible act independently. They depicted Ian as having become almost entirely consumed by Trista, having moved out of his own house and essentially relinquishing all his possessions, giving himself over entirely to her control. His situation, they observed, had deteriorated to such an extent that he appeared to see not much of a way out. They also recounted instances where Trista had threatened suicide during their arguments, viewing this as yet another manipulative tactic designed to control Ian. It became increasingly clear to all involved that both Ian Shirley and Robert McBain had been easily manipulated by Trista Hrabak. Ian himself described Daniel Raven as a nice guy, but was fully aware of Trista's intense dislike for him and her persistent desire to have him eliminated. Robert McBain admitted he had never personally met Daniel Raven, knowing him only through Trista Hrabak's as palpable hatred towards him. The investigation conclusively pointed to Trista Hrabak as the true mastermind behind the entire sinister plot. However, despite the compelling confessions of her co-conspirators and the undeniable evidence of her manipulative nature, prosecutors still harbored concerns about taking their case against Trista to a jury trial. The absence of a direct confession from Trista, coupled with her unwavering stance of blaming Ian for his actions and minimizing McBain's involvement, created a degree of prosecutorial apprehension. There are always inherent fears when presenting such a complex case to a jury, particularly when the central figure refuses to admit culpability. Recognizing these challenges, Trista's attorneys, likely facing their ove kept no concerns about the potential outcome of a jury trial, opted to accept a plea deal. In February of the year 2015, Trista Hrabak was sentenced to 15 years of initial confinement, followed by an additional 10 years on extended supervision. The family of Daniel Raven, still reeling from their devastating loss, found the sentencing outcomes deeply unsatisfying, particularly Trista's sentence. Daniel's son, reflecting on his father's murderous punishment, expressed a common sentiment. When Mort heard my dad's sentence, Mort ve kepa etna, surprised by 20 years, but Mort think Trista should have gotten at least the same as my dad at minimum. The stark imbalance in the sentences struck many as unjust, especially given Trista's clear role as the instigator and manipulator. The fact that you can plan and Mati can say that plan a murder like that and get people involved not just once but to try it multiple times, and then you get 15 years in jail. Mott, what kind of joke is that? The sentiment of deep injustice permeated their words, concluding, Mutt don't think any sentence would have been fair enough for me. Honestly, it's not for me to judge. It's not really even a judge to judge, but Mutt think it was fair. In the quiet rural landscape that had been Daniel Raven's home, his memory is kept alive. Each year, his friends, his cousins, and his cherished children gather for a guy's camping weekend, a poignant tradition where Daniel's ashes are spread, a silent invitation for him to remain among them, to participate in the simple joy of old times remembered. A humble memorial stands in that serene outdoor setting, a place they revisit annually, camping there to commune with Daniel's spirit. His presence is still keenly felt, a comforting and guiding force. One friend expressed, "Mo't feel like Dan's been there for me a few times, and Mort try to live as best as Mort can for him. Mort feel like he is watching over me still. The collective hope of his loved ones is that Daniel be remembered not for the painful, turbulent times he endured with Trista, but for the vast richness of the good times, the laughter, the love, and the kindness he shared. Moat remember him, and Moat will always remember him. The analysis of this tragic case of Daniel Raven's murder, orchestrated by Trista Hrabak, Ian Shirley, and Robert McBain, provides profound insights into the underlying motives for shot heinous crimes, and offers a stark reminder of why they unfortunately occur with alarming frequency. At the heart of this particular tragedy lay a potent cocktail of financial desperation, manipulation, and the corrosive fear of exposure. Daniel S. threat to reveal Trista S. alleged welfare and food stamp fraud acted as the primary catalyst, pushing Trista to believe that murder was her only viable escape from the specter of federal prison. This motive is unfortunately common in criminal cases, where individuals facing dire personal or legal consequences view violence, even extreme violence, as a desperate means to eliminate a problem, to silence a witness, or to sever ties to incriminating activities. The desire to maintain a fabricated lifestyle, to cling to ill-gotten gains, or simply to avoid accountability can warp moral compasses to an unfathomable degree. The repeated attempts by Ian Shirley to carry out the murder, driven by Trista's relentless emotional coercion and threats to abandon him, underscore another, disturbing and frequently observed dynamic: the power of manipulation within toxic relationships. Ian, by all accounts, was deeply entangled with Trista, seemingly under her spell, to the point where he lost his own moral agency. He was, as described by family and investigators, easily swayed, his better judgment subsumed by Trista S. will. Robert McBain, the driver, represents yet another common element in criminal conspiracies. Individuals drawn into illicit activities through existing friendships, often initially dismissing the gravity of the intentions, believing the talk to be mere jokes until the point of no return. Their compliance, born from a mix of friendship, perhaps a desire to please, or a fundamental lack of awareness of the depths of malevolence, illustrates how a core conspirator can extend their reach. These cases highlight the insidious nature of control, where one person's strong will, often fueled by desperation and amorality, can corrupt and direct the actions of others, ultimately leading to unthinkable acts. From an investigative standpoint, this case offers a compelling masterclass in how police rely on a combination of crucial details, forensic science, and astute interrogation techniques to track down perpetrators, even those who believe they have planned a flawless crime. The initial meticulous examination of the crime scene yielded invaluable clues. The perfect angle from the porch to the couch, the 2 shell casings found outside, confirming a long rifle, and the subtle but discernible tracks lead to and from the residence, all immediately pointed to a premeditated hit rather than a random act or an accidental shooting. The smell of gunpowder, though a sensory detail, also fixed the location and recency of the firearm discharge. These physical details, meticulously collected and documented, laid the groundwork for the investigation, guiding initial theories and narrowing the scope of possibilities. However, the true turning point in this case, and indeed a significant lesson for modern law enforcement, lay in the power of digital evidence. The subpoenaed cell phone records of Trista Hrabak and Ian Shirley became the irrefutable backbone of the prosecution's case. Text messages, in particular, provided a chilling, real-time narrative of the plot's unfolding, detailing Trista's persistent demands, Ian's initial reluctance, his chilling promises, and the involvement of a third party, RB, later identified as Robert McBain. This reliance on digital footprints has become increasingly critical in contemporary policing. Criminals, despite their efforts to erase physical traces, often leave behind extensive digital breadcrumbs, calls, texts, location data, social media interactions that can form an incredibly detailed and incriminating record of their planning and movements. The sophistication of the criminals, in this case, initially, seemed to involve an attempt at establishing a solid alibi, the strategically placed cameras, and the out-of-view walkway, and maintaining a distance from the direct act, hoping to deflect suspicion. However, their ultimate undoing came from their failure to consider the permanence and retrievability of their digital communications. Their belief that conversations held remotely or via text messages were inherently less traceable than physical interactions proved to be a fatal miscalculation. The sequence of interrogations further exemplifies best practices in law enforcement. Starting vakep itehat, those least involved and systematically working towards the suspected mastermind, proved effective. Tiffany Workman, Daniel S.'s current girlfriend, was interviewed early on. Her emotional state and lack of corroborating evidence ruling her out, allowing detectives to focus elsewhere. The social worker's crucial, almost offhand, tip about Ian Shirley's comment concerning ending the conflict by killing Daniel provided the vital spark, redirecting the investigation with laser-like precision. Confronting Robert McBain, the presumed getaway driver, with the unassailable evidence of the text messages was a strategic masterstroke. Once he realized the extent of what the police knew, his initial denials crumbled, leading to a full confession that not only implicated himself, but crucially, put Ian Shirley squarely at the scene as the trigger man. This cascading effect of confessions, McBain's validating the texts, then Shirley's providing minute details of the execution and motive, demonstrates how carefully managed interrogations, backed by solid evidence, can break a conspiracy wide open. The recovery of the murder weapon, described precisely by McBain, further cemented the validity of his testimony. From this tragic narrative, numerous life lessons emerge, offering a profound warning to the community and individuals alike. Firstly, the case vividly illustrates the destructive potential of unresolved interpersonal conflicts, especially those entangled with financial disputes. While disagreements are a part of life, when animosity festers and individuals feel cornered by threats of legal exposure or financial ruin, the desperation can lead to unthinkable violence. It underscores the critical importance of seeking healthy, legal, and mediated resolutions to disputes, rather than allowing resentment and fear to escalate into deadly intentions. No amount of money or social standing is worth a human life, nor the resulting life sentence in prison. Secondly, the profound impact of manipulation within relationships is laid bare. Trista Hrabak's ability to coerce and control Ian Shirley, and to a lesser extent Robert McBain, serves as a powerful cautionary tale about identifying and escaping toxic relationships. Emotional blackmail, threats of abandonment, and the constant erosion of another's moral compass can lead individuals down incredibly dark paths they would never otherwise contemplate. It highlights the need for individuals to recognize warning signs of manipulation, maintain strong personal boundaries, and seek support from trusted friends, family, or professionals when feeling entrapped or pressured into compromising their ethics. Thirdly, for anyone who believes that their communications are private and ephemeral, this case offers a stark lesson in the enduring nature of digital footprints. Every text message, Every call record, every digital interaction leaves a trace. Criminals often underestimate the power of digital forensics, thinking their plots are concealed behind the screens of their phones. The reality is that these digital records can be meticulously retrieved, reconstructed, and used as incontrovertible evidence, providing an impartial witness to every detail of a conspiracy. The idea that you can plan a murder like that and try it multiple times and somehow avoid justice, when those plans are meticulously documented in text, is a dangerous illusion. Finally, the case underscores the vital importance of taking threats seriously, even if they initially appear to be empty or just a way for someone to get back at another. Daniel Raven's threat to expose Trista S.'s alleged fraud, coupled with her extreme fear of federal prison, ignited a chain of events that proved fatal. Similarly, Daniel's prior discovery of the sawed-off shotgun in his blazer, which he believed Trista planted to implicate him, was a clear warning of her malicious intent and willingness to cause him severe harm. These were not mere spats, but escalating indicators of a deeply dangerous dynamic. Taking such threats seriously, documenting them, and involving authorities at an earlier stage could, in some instances, potentially avert future tragedies. For law enforcement, the experiences garnered from cases like this offer invaluable lessons on how to apprehend perpetrators more swiftly and effectively. The sheer speed with which modern investigations can move, once critical evidence like digital records are secured, is transformative, ensuring the swift procurement of warrants for phone records, surveillance footage, and other digital data, once reasonable suspicion is established, is paramount. This rapid action prevents criminals from destroying evidence and allows investigators to build a comprehensive timeline of events and communications. Moreover, cultivating strong relationships with other social services, as demonstrated by the crucial tip from the social worker, can open unexpected avenues for leads, underscoring that collaboration across different agencies can significantly expedite the investigative process. Thorough training in forensic interviewing techniques is also essential, enabling officers to skillfully navigate denials, present evidence strategically, and facilitate confessions that hold up in court, as seen in the breakthrough interviews with McBain and Shirley. Furthermore, community engagement, where citizens feel safe and encouraged to report suspicious activity or provide pertinent information, even if it seems minor, remains a cornerstone